Today we're here to look at Brendan Fraser and determine who actually destroyed his career. Because he went from someone that was extremely famous, dominating Hollywood, to someone that you don't really see around much anymore. As we dive into this one, I'm having my morning coffee. Let me know what you're drinking. Thanks for subscribing. Now let's dive in.
This is Brendan Fraser. He was one of Hollywood's most promising rising stars in the early 2000s. And then he disappeared. Major studios stopped working with him. He wasn't getting audition callbacks. He suffered a divorce that resulted in him losing millions of dollars. His body started breaking down. Lawsuits started piling up. It was almost like someone had pushed a button and sent his entire life into a downward spiral. And at the time, there actually was a man in Hollywood who had the power to make or break anyone with a couple of phone calls. His name was Philip Berk. And coincidentally, something happened at a party between Brendan and Philip just before Brendan was seemingly blacklisted from the industry.
We have to remember that in Hollywood, there are just a handful of people that determine who is successful and who isn't. And really, if you upset the wrong people or if you push their buttons the wrong way, they can completely destroy your career, and it seems like that's what's gonna happen right here.
The craziest part was, Brendan wasn't even trying to expose Philip. He didn't go to the police, he didn't launch a publicity tour, he just privately asked Philip for an apology. But sadly, Hollywood doesn't operate like the real world, and they would make sure that Brendan would regret telling anyone about that night in 2003. But after 2 decades of being silenced, Brendan Fraser finally decided to fight back, and his story would unravel one of Hollywood's most powerful, untouchable networks. Brendan Fraser was getting the kind of worldwide recognition most actors could only dream of, and a lot of this had to do with how he was not afraid of taking on unique and challenging roles. His early claim to fame was acting in the comedy Encino Man as a defrosted caveman, and then the drama School Ties alongside Matt Damon and Ben Affleck.
I'll tell you, some of these movies, they're just bringing me back 20-something years. Let me know if you guys were Brendan Fraser fans, and if seeing all of these old school videos popping up is just giving you a time warp back in time.
Fraser maintained his momentum when Disney hired him to play George in George of the Jungle, a parody of Tarzan that went on to be a box office success, making 3 times its production budget. But Fraser's most appealing qualities was that he was friendly and unserious. Like, the industry was doing its best to present Fraser as the next heartthrob, but he just seemed like a chill guy happy to be included.
How much physical training did you do for this?
Years and months, weeks, and then there was the bicycle pump before each take. I would just pump it all up. They call it cut. But that's a trade secret, so don't tell anyone.
Fraser was refreshing, not a self-absorbed, overly dramatic star like most other 90s actors, but that didn't mean he wasn't taking his acting skills seriously, and that was on full display in his most iconic role in The Mummy, an action movie where Fraser played treasure hunter and adventurer Rick O'Connell. For Fraser, this was his most demanding role yet. Development for The Mummy took years, exchanging several directors and screenplay revisions, and when actors were sent into the Sahara Desert, they endured long periods of isolation and massive sandstorms that would stall production. It also led to him nearly losing his life. Before its official release, Fraser went on David Letterman to promote the movie. He talked about the demanding nature of the role, but turned it into a silly joke.
In North Africa, in the Sahara Desert, where Lawrence of Arabia was shot, sandstorms would kick up, and they would always cause us to have to stop work early, and sometimes the sand would just get everywhere, actually. Which reminds me.
Where did you get that sand? Well, it's in my shaving kit, too.
Even though Fraser chose to be modest about the challenges out in the desert, the performance took a great toll on his body for many of the scenes. After Letterman pushed for the full story, Fraser admitted that for his execution scene at the start of the film, he had a traumatic experience where he almost died in what was supposed to be a mock hanging. After the director wanted to get a close-up of Fraser, he asked for another take where the rope was tighter. The incident almost ended his life.
Tightened it up, and the director came over and said, I don't know, the tension didn't look like it was realistic, wasn't matching before. Can we just take it up a little bit more? And I said, I don't know, well, okay, just one take. And so the camera spun around and it landed on my face. And all I remember is this sort of volume kind of like sound going, ew. And then the next thing I know, my elbow is in my ear and there's all these medics going, hello, Brendan, wake up.
Yeah.
Brendan.
So you're nearly dead.
I did die. But there was nothing.
You're actually technically dead?
Technically dead. My doctor told me for like 12 or 14 seconds.
I think
That's crazy that, I guess it's something that we don't acknowledge, that for certain movies that are being produced, the actors are put in intense situations, this being one of them. Something that we don't really consider a lot, especially in some of these action films.
12 or 14 seconds.
I think it's key for you to focus on how he said, okay, just one take. Brendan knew this was dangerous, and he clearly had a gut feeling to say no, but he did it anyways and almost paid the price. This experience is a perfect example of how actors in those days of Hollywood weren't meant to question the process or how the industry works. They either surrender themselves to those in control or risk the chance of never being able to work again. Luckily, the sacrifice is paid off. The Mummy was the movie that transformed Fraser from a young actor in cult classics into a global superstar. It also showed Hollywood that he was a moneymaker. Even though the creation of this film was drawn out and expensive, costing about $80 million to produce, it made almost $500 million in the worldwide box office.
Wow.
Suddenly, Fraser was the only person people were talking about. Additionally, his personal life was thriving. He was recently married to actress Afton Smith and had his first child. As far as the public was concerned, he was on top of the world and had very little to complain about. After coming back for the sequel, The Mummy Returns, it proved to be just as profitable as the original. He had finally made it to the top of the Hollywood mountain, and his personality made it easy for fans to celebrate his success. But unfortunately, it wouldn't last.
And don't these movies continuously make money? Like, even today, isn't The Mummy 1 still making income? I'm sure that it is.
Without fully understanding it at the time, Fraser had now entered the belly of the beast at one of the worst times in Hollywood history. It was a time where mental and physical were rampant, where those in power never faced the consequences of their actions because they owned the gateway to fame and recognition. Brendan was about to suffer the harsh reality of being enemies with the Hollywood foreign press after he claimed that he was assaulted by their leader, a claim that would essentially get him blacklisted from Hollywood for nearly 2 decades. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association, also known as the HFPA, was basically like the Hollywood Mafia at the height of its power. It started as a group of Los Angeles-based foreign journalists who wanted to control the distribution of cinema news to non-US markets in 1943. Just 1 year later, they decided to make their own award show called the Golden Globes. It was initially belittled by the industry. However, when they were picked up by NBC in the late 1980s, everything changed. Their ratings spiked dramatically, and their Golden Globe trophy became one of the most coveted prizes for movie producers in the United States. At the time, winning this trophy could secure a sustainable or even a flourishing career in Hollywood. And while you would hope that the show was just a pure celebration of art and the trophy was fairly given to the best movie or actor, that wasn't the case. In reality, it was a carefully controlled system of influence, and whoever controlled the awards controlled Hollywood itself. And one of those gatekeepers was serial predator producer Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was also a strong proponent of the Globes, capitalizing on the award show's timing. Weinstein manipulated the organization in ways big and small: expensive gifts, special access to stars, and his own time and attention at a moment when other studio chiefs mocked the Globes. He was often rewarded with a stunning number of nominations.
Now, you may be wondering how Harvey Weinstein plays into this. We're talking about Brendan Fraser, not all of the women that had to suffer from the years of mistreatment from Harvey Weinstein. So how is he going to play in? Is Brendan Fraser going to actually try and stand up for what's right in the industry?
Other studios eventually adopted a similar playbook of using the HFPA to set the tone for the year's awards season. Harvey essentially used his power to influence the HFPA and the Golden Globes to nominate his movies constantly and even win some of these awards to give himself more legitimacy than ever before. And that legitimacy gave him a ton of power in Hollywood. If you were on his good side, you could essentially get any opportunity you wanted.
Who do you most want to party with tonight?
What?
Kaiser, the best designer in the world.
They were asking about Factory Girl.
Oh, they asked me about dresses.
No, they were asking about movie.
Who are you wearing tonight, Harvey?
I'm wearing Factory Girl, a new brand.
Yeah,
Factory
me
Girl's
too.
coming out February 2nd in theaters everywhere. It's my new brand, Factory Girl tie, Factory Girl suit, Factory
Factory girl accessory. I'm a handbag, a purse, a man purse.
And who do you most want to party with tonight?
Hey?
Who do you most want to party with?
Harvey Weinstein.
Interesting. She called herself a merce, an accessory for Harvey Weinstein, and she wants to party with Harvey Weinstein that night. You know what was happening.
In the words of movie star Scarlett Johansson, the HFPA is an organization that was legitimized by the likes of Harvey Weinstein to amass momentum for Academy recognition, and the industry followed suit. Now you have to remember that anyone outside of the Hollywood bubble didn't really know about the power that the HFPA had. Even if the average person cared to find out about who they were, they probably just thought it was a small group of people who vote on the Golden Globes winners, and they probably assumed that they did it fairly. The HFPA used secrecy to their advantage, and they basically started paying people for their silence.
Wait, are they trying to say that the Golden Globes were not honestly judged? That there was corruption going on behind the scenes on who actually won their Golden Globes? Is that surprising to you?
According to the New York Times, everyone got a cut. Publicists got paid to steer clients down the pre-show red carpet. Awards strategists began charging studios for advice on how to manipulate the Globe's voters. An HFPA consultant can receive a $45,000 fee for his or her work, a $20,000 bonus if the film earns a Best Picture nomination, and $30,000 if the film wins.
Do you remember Jim Carrey, where he would state that these events, these large events like the Golden Globes, were all just a sham? He'd rather be anywhere else than at those events. It's not only because of the dirty, evil corruption that goes on inside of Hollywood, but it's also because of this. These awards are not actually awarding who may be the best. There's incentive that goes on behind the scenes for certain films and certain producers actually winning, so that they can then gain more power, more strength, more credibility, and have more success getting better actors, actresses, and films going forward.
Fees flowed to an army of stylists, limo drivers, spray tanners, banquet servers, and red carpet layers, as well as the trade magazines and newspapers that benefited from the additional advertising revenue. This is literally the Mafia. The HFPA controls everything from global news coverage about Hollywood to the laborers that are spray tanning and rolling out the red carpet. The HFPA was the Hollywood machine, and one of the key members of that association that made this possible was Philip Berk. He had been a member of the HFPA for 33 years and off and on president for 8 terms. He also tended to stay out of the limelight.
Sounds like someone that you don't want to upset. And you're going to very soon see how this all ties into Brendan Fraser.
Most of his appearances being brief and strange, like when he compared the film The Social Network to Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. It's a bizarre comparison considering that Citizen Kane is noted as one of the greatest films of all time.
The reason it's a great film, it's an example of absolutely masterful filmmaking. I compare it to Citizen Kane in some respect. The thing that makes it unique is that it's not just a great piece of filmmaking, but it's easily the most entertaining movie I sat through last year.
Honestly, after hearing him speak, it's not hard to wonder if Berk ever watched a movie in his entire life. But that didn't matter, because he was the head of the HFPA, which was now a massive Hollywood institution, and unfortunately, anyone who stepped out of line or refused to follow the extremely strict rules was in danger. And in order to truly understand how detrimental and scary it was for Brendan Fraser to be feuding with Philip Berk, we have to first dive into the mysterious firing of HFPA journalist Nick Douglas, who sadly ended up dead after breaking a couple of the HFPA's ridiculous rules.
Interesting.
Nick Douglas was a journalist for Big Buzz magazine. He was also a member of the HFPA, but he was suspended in 2004 after having sold a photograph of himself and Tom Selleck to a tabloid newspaper for $50 and then lying about it. Now, this is important because the HFPA has a strict rules policy against Nick's actions. Movie stars take pictures with each individual member of the association at their press conferences. Members may not sell the photos to the tabloids, largely because of the objections of the stars. Some speculate the reason why Nick sold the photo was because he was an aspiring actor himself. So I guess he thought this photo might make him seem like him and Tom Selleck had some sort of working relationship. Now, maybe this could justify a suspension, but it gets even more ridiculous. Members of the HFPA also justified his suspension due to Nick Douglas having taken unopened beers from a reception thrown by MGM. This is literally like going to a work party and then getting fired because you took the free drinks provided at the work party. But the HFPA used this to justify Nick's termination. He was cut off from press junkets and celebrity interviews that the HFPA controlled, essentially making him unemployed. unemployed.
They basically fired him for taking a couple of beers from the event, probably back to his room or wherever he was going to go. They clearly had plans of removing him from staff prior to this event.
The severity of the situation took a sad turn when Nick Douglas was found dead on his own volition in 2005, 4 days before the next Golden Globe nominations were announced in Beverly Hills. Mr. O'Kane was Douglas's editor-in-chief and was asked for a comment, and he didn't hold back, arguing that the association was directly responsible. They basically took a livelihood away from a guy who was out there trying to earn a living. It led completely, directly to what ended up happening to Nick. When Philip Berk was asked about the incident and its ties to Douglas's suspension, the response was cold and short, with Berk saying, "We've had many people suspended for actions we deemed harmful to the Hollywood foreign press. We're trying to protect our image. Certainly, none ended up in suicide. If Nick did take his life, which seems apparent, I don't think you can say there's a casual relationship between the two." Berk's response to the death of another human being, one that represented his association, had about as much compassion as you'd give to the loss of a classroom hamster. To them, losing a member wasn't a tragedy. They felt indifferent. It also begged the question, if an HFPA journalist could be punished so severely for a $50 photo and cheap beer, what kept Philip Berk and his inner circle from doing the same to up-and-coming stars? If someone managed to threaten his seemingly unlimited power, what was to stop someone like Berk from making sure that an actor wouldn't be able to work in Hollywood ever again? While we didn't know it at the time, it looks like that was the very reason rising star Brendan Fraser went from being one of the industry's most promising actors to basically disappearing for 2 decades. It all started when Brendan Fraser claimed he was assaulted by Philip Berk in 2003 at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
All right, so here is where the call out begins. He's starting to speak up about foul play.
After a luncheon, Fraser left the venue and saw Berk. He reached out to shake his hand, only to essentially get molested the second they made contact. His left hand reaches around, grabs my cheek, and one of his fingers touches me in the taint, and he starts moving it around. According to Fraser, the incident left him feeling detached and feeling sick to his stomach, affecting the way he interacted with the outside world. "I felt ill," he said, recalling his emotions after he removed Berk's hand. "I felt like a little kid."
I mean, it seems like no matter what story we dive into, it turns into a type of assault from these elites at the upper end of Hollywood. It seems like all of them feel that they can do what they wish with all of these Hollywood actors and actresses. It's actually disgusting, and I don't blame him for feeling ill.
I felt like there was a ball in my throat. I thought I was going to cry. I felt like someone had thrown invisible paint on me. Brendan later noted that everything was hazy after the incident. He left the event and thought about telling the cops about what happened, but he ultimately chose to confide in his wife Afton, deciding to keep it quiet in fear of losing his identity or his career. I didn't want to contend with how that made me feel or it becoming part of my narrative, but the trauma of what happened demoralized Fraser to the point where he had trouble living a normal life. Fraser and his representatives reached out to the HFPA to get Berk to write an apology, and while we don't have the full letter, it seems that Berk wasn't very apologetic, later describing the letter saying, "My apology admitted no wrongdoing, the usual. If I've done anything that upset Mr. Fraser, it was not intended, and I apologize."
He was clearly not willing to admit that he did those actions. He's sorry that he upset Brendan Fraser with whatever he may have done, but he didn't do anything that was actually inappropriate.
Now, after Brendan got this non-apology from Philip Berk, the HFPA did reach out to Fraser separately. They promised him and his representatives that he would not have to be in the same room with Philip Berk ever again, but Berk denies this, and the HFPA has refused to comment on this part of the story. Keep in mind that the information you just learned was not widely known and discussed. People generally did not know about Brendan Fraser's alleged assault, and even if they did, sadly, back in those days, he probably would have been publicly mocked. And this was a major turning point in Fraser's life and career, one that he'd never fully recover from. He recalled just going through the motions, continuing to work for himself and his family, but battling the fog of depression to the point where he admits to having issues with memory after trying to make sense of what happened to him that day. "I became depressed. I was blaming myself and I was miserable because I was saying, this is nothing. This guy reached around and copped a feel. That summer wore on, and I can't remember what I went on to work on next." After the demoralizing encounter with one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, Brendan Fraser still had a mild screen presence as district attorney in the Oscar-winning film Crash.
Now just think about this. Brendan Fraser, at least as far as we know, had one inappropriate encounter with an elite from Hollywood, someone that could determine his entire future. That brief encounter really messed him up. It really got to him mentally and emotionally. Now think about some of the men and women that had to deal with multiple interactions, months or years of interactions like this. How devastating that could be to their brain, to their mind, and to their just whole presence. Because there are tons of actors and actresses that have to deal with these same people, the Harvey Weinsteins of the industry, and they have to deal with them for extended periods of time. It just shows that how even one instance of this type of abuse can really mess somebody up and affect their entire personality and even potentially their future career.
He also made a few guest appearances in Scrubs, King of the Hill, and The Simpsons. However, his career seemed to be lacking focus. His starring role in the Mummy franchise, while still making money, was underperforming the original two movies that put him on the map. To make matters worse, the physical risks Fraser took in these action movies were taking a toll on his body to the point where he could barely move. I believe I probably was trying too hard in a way that's destructive. I was put together with tape and ice, just like really nerdy and fetishy about ice packs, screw cap ice packs, and downhill mountain biking pads, because they're small and light and they can fit under your clothes. I was building an exoskeleton for myself daily, and after production, the pain didn't stop, with Fraser having to spend a small fortune on multiple surgeries. He told GQ, "I needed a laminectomy, and the lumbar didn't take, so they had to do it again a year later. There was a partial knee replacement, some more work on his back, bolting various compressed spinal pads together. At one point, he needed to have his vocal cords repaired." All told, Fraser says he was in and out of hospitals for almost 7 years.
That's crazy, and I'm sure, because I didn't know, I'm sure many of you didn't know, that he dealt with so much physical trauma creating that movie. I had no idea, and a lot of times we think that stunt doubles and people like that will take on that job, which is it really okay for them to deal with it also? But in this case, he did all of that work, potentially because he felt pressured to do it, and he paid for 7 years the prices through those surgeries.
And his life only continued to take one dive after another as he and his wife Afton divorced in 2009. Looking at an interview with Afton in 2005, it seemed like she possibly had some regrets about stepping back from her professional life. She made it sound like she was making a sacrifice for Fraser, and lightly touched on how Hollywood couples tend to struggle when they have similar ambitions.
So it wasn't because you married an actor that you stepped out?
No, I was sort of losing my passion for it, I would say. And really in a couple, two actors is a little rough when traveling and one has to stay home and audition and one is off making films, and it just too much separation. And
have you seen that happen with your friends?
Seems a bit common in Hollywood, doesn't it?
At the time, the divorce settlement required Fraser to pay $50,000 per month in spousal support, with an additional $25,000 per month in child support for their 3 kids. But this was determined at the time when Fraser was making the most money he ever had in his career. Without knowing much about his personal life, the media essentially made his suffering into a big joke.
These days, it's his finances that are in a wreck. According to TMZ, Fraser is hemorrhaging nearly $90,000 a month on expenses, including $50,000 in alimony, which he's currently trying to lower. The actor continues to work and reportedly makes a little more than $200,000 a month. But still, his agents take more than half, and his general fees are costing more than he earns. Also, he's apparently paying $5,000 on mortgage, $25,000 on child support, $34,000 on income tax, and thousands in various other expenses. Luckily, Fraser won't need to call his mummy for money because he's reportedly worth about $25 million. But he may be hoping for another Mummy sequel to help pay the bills.
All right, that was a pretty corny news clip there, but it did break down the finances. And if he was making $200,000 a month, paying $75,000 for his alimony and child support, then he had the $34,000 in income taxes. He had his team, the management team, take half of what he makes. It seems like this guy's in the red every single month. And we look at these Hollywood stars and we say they're rich, they're famous, they're making so much money. But when things like this happen, I mean, $75,000 right there is nearly half of what he makes on a monthly basis. So even though he's making some crazy numbers every month, really what goes in his pocket is nothing near that.
But unfortunately, as far as the public knew, he was just becoming old news, getting smaller and smaller roles. The internet started sharing what was called the Sad Fraser meme, originating from a photo that was taken at his lowest moment. These struggles were becoming so severe that Brendan had to start taking sketchier opportunities. One where he had to file a $3 million lawsuit against producer Todd Moyer for not paying him the money he was promised for a delayed film. And while it's never been fully verified, Moyer fired back with wild allegations, filing a countersuit where Moyer claimed that Fraser punched him repeatedly in the chest on 2 different occasions. The first time in a hotel in Indianapolis where he and Fraser had been working with the screenwriters on The Legend of William Tell. According to the complaint, Fraser, in an intoxicated state, began to physically push, verbally threaten, and punch plaintiff repeatedly in the chest. The second time happened about a year later during a production meeting on Tell. Moyer claims Fraser began screaming threats, then hit him in the chest over 20 times when Moyer refused Fraser's request to hire Charlotte Huggins as a producer on the project. In response, Fraser remained silent, but his lawyer told TMZ that the suit was ridiculous and a desperate attempt from Moyer to avoid paying off his massive debt. By 2013, Fraser was at rock bottom. His career prospects were slim, and he now had to try and renegotiate his divorce settlements with Afton. His lawyers spoke on his behalf, saying Fraser wasn't making nearly enough anymore to pay a settlement of that size. He was still willing to pay the same in child support, but the spousal support was too much to bear. But his ex-wife shockingly disagreed and actually contested the claim and accused him of fraud. The divorce was now getting messy and more public, and Afton claimed that Fraser had $9 million in film contracts that he hid from her at the time of their divorce. Fraser also cited medical issues he was facing as another reason why he had difficulty paying this level of spousal support, as he suffered a back injury after attempting to clear a tree that fell on his property during Hurricane Sandy. Ultimately, he wasn't charged with fraud, but he didn't win the suit either, so his ex-wife got paid. For over a decade, Brendan Fraser did everything he could to keep his personal life private, all while he was struggling with a level of mental, physical, and financial distress that most of us could not possibly imagine. Year after year, he became more and more of a recluse, with only occasional photos popping up where he looked tired and strained from everything falling apart around him. However, Brendan Fraser was about to fight back. After Philip Berk decided to write a memoir where he finally detailed what happened on that night with him and Fraser, along with the rise of the Me Too movement, Brendan was about to go toe-to-toe with the Hollywood machine. People were about to hear the whole story and finally understand that Brendan Fraser likely didn't lose his career because of poor decisions, but rather because those in power did everything they could to make him disappear. By 2015, the HFPA and their weaponization of the Golden Globes was no longer an industry secret.
I kind of feel bad for what he had to deal with, right? We know that when divorce happens, relationships break up, one of the parties typically has to pay a good chunk of their money in alimony. His chunk just happened to be fairly massive because of the amount of money that he was making. We could hope that that was negotiated down to an amount that was sustainable for him as he got smaller and smaller roles, as his peak kind of, went on a decline. But I feel bad that he had to deal with the divorce, the physical injury, the lack of roles because of what he had dealt with and speaking out on it. I don't know, it's just kind of sad.
Rumors of bribery and extortion were rampant, and one of the things that brought public attention to this was how underperforming films were somehow competing for Best Picture, like Cher and Christina Aguilera's musical Burlesque, or Angelina Jolie and Johnny Depp's The Tourist, which suspiciously received 3 nods in 2010. Both movies made it to the Golden Globes as masterpieces, even though they were bashed by both critics and audiences as total flops. And this caused a lot of investigative journalists to question what exactly was happening behind the scenes. One of the most damning quotes allegedly proved how the Golden Globes is a hotbed for and financial exploitation. Writers with the New York Times said that they managed to get in contact with an HFPA insider who said, "Sometimes actors will even flirt with members, whatever it takes to integrate themselves. Even though everyone in the industry knows that the awards lack any real credibility, they still generate huge publicity for their movies, and it's a lot easier to curry favor with a few dozen HFPA members than it is to suck up to the Academy." In case there's any confusion at this point as to who the HFPA are and what they do, they're essentially just a group of about 100 journalists who report on and talk about what's going on in Hollywood throughout the year. But then when the Golden Globes comes around, they vote on the nominees as well as the winners. But the industry secret was that basically whoever bribed these people, whoever schmoozed them, wined them, dined them, actors, hang out with them, making them feel special because they're just journalists and, ooh, they get to hang out with Tom Cruise today. That makes them feel special and interesting, and in turn they will, nominate your movie and maybe even vote for it to win because that's going to help your movie.
We're basically talking about extreme favoritism. You become friendly and chummy with some of these actors and actresses and producers, and you're more likely to put them forward as a potential winner of this award, not to mention all the bribery that was going on in the background as well.
The president of that organization, the HFPA, was Philip Berk in the early 2010s, and he decided to publish a memoir about his life called With Signs and Wonders, and he also addressed numerous controversies within the organization. What made it so bizarre was how open he was about the inner workings of one of Hollywood's sketchiest clubs. He openly admitted to the HFPA being territorial, battling outside journalists who accused them of being exclusive or controlling, and for some reason he decided it would be a perfect time to mention his alleged groping incident with Brendan Fraser. According to Philip Berk, he and Fraser weren't alone leaving the luncheon in 2003. Multiple people were there, and he noted that Brendan had presented a check representing the HFPA's charitable donation to Film Aid International. Regarding the incident, Berk said, "In the course of the conversation, he asked Fraser about a rumor that at the Golden Globes the prior year, he had pinched the female HFPA president. To demonstrate, Berk said that he then pinched Fraser's butt. Fraser's response, according to Berk, was, "He pinched my ass," or "he touched my bod." It's kind of funny because this story doesn't really help Berk the way he thinks it helps him. He basically says that they're at this luncheon, they're chit-chatting, and then they talk about how Philip was accused of assaulting the previous HFPA president at the Golden Globes the year prior. And he's like, nah, I didn't assault her. Look, I just pinched her butt. And he does it to Fraser. So he essentially is like, oh, this is not assault. Here, look, I'll show you. And then he kind of assaults someone again to prove his point. But the thing is, this was written in Philip Berk's memoir, and I just can't imagine that, in the early 2010s, people were dying to read the life story about the HFPA president. Like, I'm sure most people didn't see this or they didn't care. Now, this was reported. There are articles that talk about it, but it's not like this was breaking news. This had happened 10, 12 years ago at that point, so I think most people just probably didn't care. Brendan Fraser, on the other hand, likely got word about what was written in this memoir, and it probably f***ed him up a little bit, because at that time, he had become a bit of a ghost. People were surprised to see Brendan in a sudden, uncomfortable appearance. Like, you can see his visible discomfort in this interview about the Showtime series The Affair. For most fans, this wasn't the Brendan Fraser they remembered, pouring sand out of his shoes on David Letterman or walking the red carpet after the box office success of The Mummy. He had sloped shoulders, a vacant stare. He had also been on the verge of tears, with his voice continuing to break as he tried to come up with the right things to say.
It's a winning cast, an ensemble. To be invited to join that for a season in an episodic is, for me, new territory professionally. I came of age in the industry working in feature films primarily. And, this is how it works. Hi, kids. Maybe one day I'll have a future in broadcasting too.
He's clearly uncomfortable there, and some of it maybe because he's withdrawing a little bit from society, communities, and then he has to go on stage. So it could be something he's uncomfortable with, but he clearly has a lot of emotion.
The only moment when he seemed to come alive was when he discovered a fan in the audience. It was almost like he had forgotten he had fans.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She's got the Ankh. Is that tattooed on your arm?
Yeah.
Is that for reals?
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Freak. Wow. Wow.
Dead serious. So
okay, I'm just going to go sit over here. All right.
I miss you, Brendan. I love this man dearly. So very humble and genuine. He's so broken inside. It's palpable in this interview. I just so desperately want to give him a hug. The truth is, Brendan was broken, both mentally and physically. But something was changing in Hollywood in a way that would soon tear down and destroy guys like Philip Berk. People were about to become deeply aware that these people could get away with anything they wanted for decades. They could silence you if you didn't sit down, shut up, and behave. For Fraser, it it was an opportunity to break that silence and expose Hollywood for what it really was. The year 2018 was the absolute peak of what is known as the Me Too movement. People started coming out with stories of sexual exploitation and abuse in Hollywood. The most notable was the initial allegations and arrest of Harvey Weinstein, who was notorious in the industry for aspiring artists. And as we said before, Harvey Weinstein was deeply involved with the HFPA, and many people credit him with legitimizing that entire organization. So when Brendan Fraser decided to tell his story about Philip Berk and the entire HFPA organization, people were finally ready to listen to him. In a private interview while caring for his horse, Brendan Fraser told a close colleague from GQ everything he had been hiding for over a decade. It made me retreat. It made me feel reclusive. It was also here that he shared the details of what I said earlier in the video about Berk reaching around and grabbing his behind. From there, he talked about how he couldn't even find the words to describe this to the authorities, so that's why he never made a case of it. And he also described the immense power of Philip Berk's HFPA and how they likely blacklisted him from Hollywood. I don't know if this curried disfavor with the group, with the HFPA, but the silence was deafening. And that's the thing about being blacklisted. You never can really find out, right? Like, nobody says, you're blacklisted and then it's over. They usually just quietly ignore you and don't say anything, like you're not even there. And that's exactly how Brendan Fraser felt. From there, he described how he lost his sense of self, who I was and what I was doing, and how his work, which was so consistent at his peak, withered on the vine for me. In my mind, at least, something had been taken away from me. I know Rose McGowan. I know Ashley Judd. I know Mira Sorvino. I've worked with them. I call them my friends in my mind. I haven't spoken to them in years, but they're my friends. I watched this wonderful movement, these people with the courage to say what I didn't have the courage to say. Philip Berk publicly responded to the allegation that he blacklisted Fraser, and he stayed cold, saying his career declined through no fault of ours. And while Fraser was invited to attend that year's Golden Globes, he declined. But he did mention that some of his close colleagues wore black clothes with Time's Up pins. It was a small gesture to uplift the stories of all the victims of Harvey Weinstein and to be mindful and careful of elites like Philip Berk. When asked about all of this new support that Fraser was receiving from people in the industry and online, he remained characteristically humble. He just hoped that others would follow the trend and wanted to acknowledge those who spoke out first.
He's coming across as a really humble, nice guy that's honestly quite sad about how his career and his life has turned. And this is kind of a sad story, to be honest with you. And it may be a combination of both, right? Maybe all actors and actresses have their peaks and have their valleys and have their decline. That's just factual. You know, they get older, they maybe don't get the right roles, they're not playing in movies that everyone loves or shows that everyone loves. But I think that a large part of that also has to do with what was accessible to him. If he was blacklisted, which it seems like he was, not being offered the proper roles because he had spoken up about the industry prior to the Me Too movement, you know, his decline maybe was accelerated.
Can I be truthful and say I haven't really looked. I'm aware that there's some support. I'm grateful for that, and I'm told that perhaps maybe someone will feel the inspiration that I felt to come forward and say what I had to. But it took people far more courageous than I was ever considering attempting to be, who stood together, spoke their truth, and inspired me to do the same.
Brendan went from playing a hero in movies to being a real-life hero. What a guy. Shortly after fans rallied in unanimous support for Brendan Fraser, he secured many more movies and TV roles. Fans started calling this the Brenaissance in honor of his sacrifice and comeback. It started as a voice actor for Robot Man on DC Universe's Titans, but he ended up tugging at fans' heartstrings in a film called The Whale. It was unlike any other role Fraser had played before. He wasn't the charismatic adventurer or hero. He was playing a person whose life was falling apart. In 2022, people were startled to see that Brendan Fraser chose The Whale as his major comeback movie. While this isn't a movie about his real life, The Whale seemed to connect with Fraser on a personal level. There were a lot of themes in the film that he had been grappling with in his real life for over a decade. The plot revolved around a severely obese English teacher who had been suffering with his identity.
I haven't seen this movie. but I definitely want to go have a look. Let me know if you saw it and your impressions of the movie in the comments, please.
The character was so ashamed of the way he looked now from years of trauma that he refused to show his face publicly. Estranged from his family, the whale's mental and physical health began to deteriorate rapidly, and this led to him spending his final days making amends to people he felt he had failed and trying to embrace the person he is within the mess. To Fraser, it was a proper metaphor for his life and the dialogue-heavy and demanding role that he said he had wanted days after losing his mom. He really connected to the physical and emotional strength required to recover and move on. And after nearly 2 decades of essentially being blacklisted and misunderstood, Brendan Fraser finally got the recognition so many felt he deserved, receiving a standing ovation that left him in tears.
Oh, that's nice. Still looks uncomfortable. Poor guy.
And at this moment, Brendan Fraser truly won. He had to play the long game, suffering countless hardships, but after all the pain he endured, he put it into his art, and The Whale actually ended up winning him an Oscar, which is one of the most coveted awards in the entire industry.
I started in this business 30 years ago, and things, they didn't come easily to me, but there was a facility that I didn't appreciate at the time, until it stopped. And it's been like I've been on a diving expedition on the bottom of the ocean, and the air on the line to the surface is on a launch being watched over by some people in my life, like my sons Holden and Leland and Griffin. I love you, Griffey. Thank you again, each one and all. I'm so grateful to you. Good night.
Only in Hollywood could you be blacklisted, judged, chewed up, and spit out, and then they give you a standing ovation 2 decades later for surviving through their disgusting town. But Brendan didn't do this for the recognition or the acceptance of his peers. He is one of the few who actually cares about the art of cinema and acting. He was being rewarded for his art, his performance, and he got to do it in front of his family and friends who witnessed him suffer for so long. Brendan Fraser's story and victory were a massive part of dismantling the HFPA's power. The Golden Globes and the organization running it were attacked from all sides. Even Ricky Gervais was attacking them on the stage of their award show that they hired him to host.
Many talented people of colour were snubbed in major categories. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. The Hollywood foreign press are all very, very racist. So, 5th time. So...
Ultimately, Philip Berk was expelled from the organization in 2021 after some racially charged commentary, and the HFPA was dissolved in 2023, along with the Golden Globes being sold to a new ownership group. There are talks about reviving the HFPA to its former status, and it still partially exists. However, it's nowhere near the massive and corrupt entity that it was when Berk and other members played with people's lives. Brendan's comeback is honorable, and he definitely deserves praise for fighting back against this evil machine. We need more celebrities calling out and detailing what Hollywood was truly like.
Now, it seems like the ending was a positive one. Unfortunately, Brendan Fraser had to deal with decades of sadness to actually get there. To check out the original video, I've linked it below as the first link in the description from Patrick CC. If you want to dive deeper into this story and to Evil Hollywood, go check out this video, and I'll see you guys over there.